There is a new force in American politics today. It's becoming known as the independent political movement. And while it is enormously powerful, it is marginalized and ignored. While its aims are very, very clear and its genesis very, very obvious, it is misunderstood and mischaracterized in some very, very blatant ways. This independent political movement has really one purpose, which is to reimagine the whole of American politics, to change everything, to re-engineer the mechanisms through which we as Americans participate and express ourselves politically, and to take us beyond the politics of division and partisanship and sectarianism to a new kind of political culture which promotes and encourages and incentivizes creativity and innovation and development. What is this movement, this independent political movement, which is really just in the process of becoming? Well, it rests on, as Betsy said, the 40% of Americans today who consider themselves political independents, not Democrats, not Republicans, not aligned with any political party, but independents. Who are those independents? Who are those 40%? Well, in some respects, they're a little bit harder to define, perhaps, than the 1% and the 99%, the haves and the have-nots. Though surely there is a connection between the growing disparity in wealth in our country and the rise of the independent voter. But who is the independent voter? Well, if you use traditional political terms, independents span the political spectrum. They're on the left, they're at the center, they're on the right, they're liberals, they're moderates, they're conservatives, they're libertarians, they're the full range of political categories, if you measure them by traditional political categories. But the thing that binds these independents together, the reason that there is a movement in the making, is because independents, though you can describe them based on traditional political categories, want to overthrow the traditional political categories. They don't want to live in them, they don't want to live by them, and they don't want those categories to determine how we vote, how we think about issues, how we talk to one another as Americans, how we innovate and think about alternatives for public policy. They want out of that. They want a culture change. They want to change everything. Let me give you just a few examples of what I think are the evidence that independents are looking to upend the traditional political ways. In 2008, and many of you know about this, I'm sure, in 2008, Barack Obama won the Democratic nomination with the support of independent voters. Many states allowed independents to vote in a presidential primary. We're not allowed to vote in many other primaries, but in the presidential primary, we're allowed to vote in 33 states. Independents supported Barack Obama. In fact, if independents had not been permitted to vote in those primaries, Hillary Clinton would have been the Democratic Party nominee. So in other words, independents upended the Democratic Party establishment. They also propelled the candidacy of John McCain on the Republican side, giving the maverick the energy and the support that he needed to get the Republican Party nomination. And then in the general election, they broke by 8 points for Obama over McCain because they were trying to install and inspire the country to move to a post-partisan political culture. Now, a few things happened after Obama was elected. First, I think the parties said to him, post-partisan, we don't do that around here. But while the election was going on, they tried to claim these independents. After 2008, the Democrats said, oh, the independents, now they're with us. Now they're Democrats. The independents didn't like that. That's probably one of the reasons why in the midterm elections, 2 years later, they switched and voted for Republicans and gave the GOP control of the House. Not because they had become Republicans, even though the GOP called a press conference and said, oh, now the independents are Republicans. They're all with us. But they weren't. In fact, the numbers of the size of the independent voter bloc continues to grow, while the numbers of Democrats and Republicans continue to decline. There's so many myths about independent voters. Let me just tell you a couple of them, just to give you a feel for this. Myth number one, independents don't exist. They don't exist. Even though Gallup, Pew, all the major polls show you 40% of the country are declaring themselves to be independents, the pundits and the analysts, oh, they don't really exist. They have a whole complicated algorithm to show you how they don't really exist. Well, when election time comes, almost half of them vote for the Democrats and others vote for Republicans, and then some don't vote. So we can tell you with supreme authority and confidence that there's really only 3 independents in the entire United States of America. But independents do exist. And they don't define themselves by who they vote for. They define themselves by saying they are independent. Now, call me a rugged American individualist. I think you get to define who you are. Myth number 2, and by the way, this contradicts myth number 1. Myth number 2, independents are in the middle. Yeah, they're centrists. They're in the middle. Well, independents are not in the middle. They're all over the spectrum in the traditional political terms. So that's a completely wrong description of who independents are. But it's not just wrong. You see, it reflects the bias of the whole system. Because independents are not in the middle between Democrats and Republicans. They are other than Democrats and Republicans. They're saying we need a whole new way of doing politics and thinking about politics and expressing ourselves. Myth number 3. Independents can't be organized. They're too different from one another. This, by the way, cancels out myth number 2. Oh, they're so different. How can you possibly bring them together? You can't organize. It's like herding cats. I've been organizing independents for 30 years. Not as a political party, but as a movement. And you can bring independents together across ideological lines, across the barriers that divide Americans from one another, if you organize them around changing the political culture, around reimagining the politics of America, the way we have conversations about issues, the way we relate to each other in the public square. That's what brings independents together. Independents have an agenda. It's a political reform agenda. A lot of these issues are considered non-sexy. Forgive me. I want to tell you a little bit about them. A primary issue for independents is the primaries. Having the right to vote in the first round of voting when so many elections are decided. In half the states, independents are not permitted to vote in that first round, and more states are trying to close their primaries. Congratulations to New England to having some of the most independent-friendly laws in the country. Let's make sure we hold on to them, and let's make sure we expand beyond this region so that the entire country has open and nonpartisan primaries. I want to introduce you to some folks who are involved in this process. Let's go down to Kentucky. A gentleman by the name of Michael Lewis formed a group called Independent Kentucky. It's a closed primary state. Independents are not allowed to vote. He got a legislator to introduce a bill to open the primaries, went to Capitol Hill to lobby for it. Take a look at what happened.
I'm tagging along to see what happens as he drives his pickup to the state capital of his home state, Kentucky, hoping to give independents a bigger voice. Okay, what's the plan?
Well, the plan is just to talk to as many senators as I can. Senator Leeper, how you doing, sir? Good. Try to get as many people on the ground as I can, wrestle them down if I have to.
Lewis is only partly kidding about a fight. He wants to overturn the state's closed primary system, a system that excludes tens of thousands of independent voters from primaries. And he knows he's about to hit a nerve.
What you're saying is, I don't like the way America runs its political system. Well, if you don't like it, move to another country.
Move to another country. That's a former governor, by the way, of Kentucky, a Democrat. The fight for nonpartisan elections is spreading all around the country. We've spent the last 10 years trying to open our primaries in New York City. The independents elected Mayor Michael Bloomberg and partnered with him over 10 years to try and bring nonpartisan reform to one of the most partisan cities in the entire nation. Meet one of the major activists for nonpartisan reform, Dr. Lenora Fulani.
Most of the cities in this country have nonpartisan elections, and the majority of those young people locked out independents are people of color. 20% African American, 11% Asian, 24% Latino, and 25% under the ages of 30. What our young people are saying to us is, we don't want to be in a party, we are independents, and we want to do politics in a new way, and we have to support that effort, and that's what we're fighting for here in New York City.
Dr. Fulani, thank you very much.
We've not won that fight yet in New York, though we've been battling for 10 years. But we won a major victory in California in 2010 when the voters enacted a statewide nonpartisan system. I want you to hear briefly from one of the great champions of this movement, the former governor of California, Arnold Schwarzenegger.
We're very happy that Proposition 14 passed, because that means now that, as the Lieutenant Governor was already saying, that everyone can go now and participate and vote. It will make our legislators and the politicians more accountable to the people. It would take power away from the parties. There's no two ways about that, and that's exactly what we wanted.
Take power away from the parties. This is a very, very radical and controversial thing to do, but that's what independents are saying needs to happen. You know, when you raise that issue, you come up with incredible resistance. And I want to show you a brief conversation between the former governor of Florida, a closed primary state, Charlie Crist, and Chuck Todd, the political director of NBC News, on this very issue.
If you have open primaries where people in some states already can do this, you know, whether you're a Republican, a Democrat, or independent, on primary election day, you can decide to vote in that party's primary, even if it's not your own. How does that help with transparency? Well, it sort of will weaken, if you will, the authority and the power of the party to just be an exclusive club.
You want to weaken political parties? You think that's healthy for the process and put power in super PACs and independent committees?
No, I think the power ought to be in the people. And if you allow the people the freedom to exercise their right to vote on primary day as well as general election day, I think what you end up having is a more powerful electorate. And that's what it should be. It's of the people, by the people, and for the people.
Of the people, by the people, for the people. That's a foundational principle of American democracy. But we've come to a point where we need to reimagine the whole of the political system in order to actually have that, to actually materialize that, to transfer the power from the parties to the people. This is a historic battle that's going on. And the presidential campaign that we're in the midst of now is sitting on top of a simmering electorate that is concerned about these kinds of issues. What are we going to do to change the American political culture? A historian at the University of North Carolina and a colleague of mine, Dr. Omar Ali, summed this up very nicely in a recent TV appearance.
What's missing from the framing of the question is that there's a larger transformation in America underway. A culture change is what people really want. A post-partisan America is what people are increasingly asking for. In fact, the majority of people don't want to be part of either the Democratic or Republican Party, quite frankly. 51% of Latinos are independent, and 31% of African Americans between the ages of 18 and 29 are independent as well. So in some ways, talking about just, you know, the Republicans and Democrats and who should do what to win is missing out on a larger transformation, a historical transformation that we're in the process of right now.
That larger transformation, we are in the process of that right now. You saw some handful of the faces and voices of this independent movement, this new force. It's a combination of insiders and outsiders. But we share a commitment to the fact that the political culture has to change, and that change has to come from the bottom up. You know, one of the founders and architects of the independent political movement, Dr. Fred Newman, once said, "This is not a third-party movement. This is an anti-party movement." And it seeks to reach the corners of all parts of this country, to bring Americans together, to reimagine our political culture, to open it up to creativity and development. Thank you so much.